Okay, so at this point, we've gotten local storage working, and I think it's probably time for us to refactor using modules. I know they were introduced at the beginning, and then I had mentioned in one of my videos if you wanted to see the modules refactored, and maybe several of you are not there yet, meaning the code we had into modules. So, but now we're at the point where we need to. Now, we don't have to. There's nothing that says the code base that we have, can't stay the way it is. But as part of us getting our code organized, because there's just reasons to have modules implemented, if you notice how many times I've had to look through and find something. Now, I have 168 lines at this point. It's actually not a huge file, but as functionality becomes more elaborate, it's not that we're going to necessarily pull this forward and do more work to it, but more than anything, just understanding modules at this point is a good thing because we have a more involved file. And I ask chat about it, and it's like, yeah, developers should implement modules, right? It's a way to organize, reuse, maintain units, and make it easier to collaborate with other developers because this is really key right here, all of these parts, and there's different approaches. So I'll just show you the approach I took. So go ahead and set up your 024 modules, copy the 023 local storage over, fire up live server, and let's get started. So when I'm doing work like we're about to do, I generally take things into its logical unit. Like when I look at this code, I see a lot of render table, render edit, render table headings. It's like, okay, well, it seems like that would be a good place to start. Okay, so let's do that. We kind of take it a chunk at a piece. So the first thing I'd do is I'd create a new file and I'd call it render.js. Nothing in here yet. I'd come over to my main.js and I would copy, along with the documentation, table, the render table, the render, delete, and edit and delete buttons, and the table headings. Do I have another one in here? Yeah, no, that's it. Okay. Along with that. So I'd hit X, get them out of here, go over to render and paste them in. So in order for them to be accessible, and we saw this with Module 1 and Module 2 when Todd showed them to you, right? In order to do that, there's actually a couple ways. You could actually, now there's something called default. Those are generally used for if you only have one thing in the file. You could, export each one, but honestly, I find, and the studying I've done says it's really just best at the end to come down here and hit export, open and close brackets, and then, you know, just name the functions. Okay. So we have render table, render edit and delete, and render headings, right? Those are the three functions we have. Okay. So what we need to do here now in main is import them, right? So we'd go up to the top of the file, we'd say import, open and close, because that's the way we've exported them. If we were doing default, and we would just list it, but we're not. So I could say transfer, was it render table, okay, comma, render this, render headings from, and it actually fills it in. And this is a reference. You probably generally want to use just a relative path, not an absolute path. And it just makes it relative to where you're running your code. And you do need to add JS here. Now, interesting, even just doing this, and let's go ahead and run it and we'll come back to this. But do you notice how these two are not the same color? And in this way, the editor is trying to help us But let's go ahead and modify the index file. Okay, if you remember, matter of fact, if you go and look at this code right now, it's broken. Can't use outside of a module. That's because, remember, when we're using type equal, we have to include this. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, and now we're getting an error on the render. But remember, up here, we haven't even done, right? We do have to tell the browser, hey, we have another file. And you do want to have this one because remember, your main file is going to look for things in the render, module. Okay, remember by using type as well, it is doing defer by default, which means we don't have to include it. Okay, and so render.js. Okay, so I can just take this off. Okay, so at this point, let's see, let's get out of here. Well, we actually might have to come back here later, so let's just keep it open. So in our main, we have render table. We have it from here. And in here, we've exported. Cool. So now we are getting an error. Okay. And what it is that the table output, which if we look in the main, was up here. And notice how by doing this, it also is given a little different color to try to help us say, hey, there's something off here. Because in this case, what needs reference? What needs this access to this reference? We could think of this a couple ways because we've defined them up in the global. And this is actually something I did a little research on. I could either pass this reference to what needs it. Okay. So what needs, and this is where we go into our code editor and I'm like, oh, okay. So it's actually here because remember the render table is called on the global space, on the global scope on the main file, right? Right now it's called at the very top right here. So because we've placed that into a module, it no longer has access. So one kind of simple thing we can do is just take this, go over to render, go to the top of the file, okay, and paste it in. Let's see if that fixes the error. Now we get another error. Okay, so it did fix the first one, but now we have a problem in that we have a reference to my data in the module file that it no longer has context for or reference to. So in this case, think about this. This is a little different problem because main, right? There's a couple of things in main that we still have, even if we move some things around later, that are going to need the my data reference. So how could we do this? Is on the render table, we could just pass my data reference to it. Okay. And this is where there's different approaches to doing this particular, and let's just see if that does fix it. Aha. Did you see it as soon as I did it? If I pass my data, then I have to, in the render, in the table, right? I have to then have the remember arguments parameters. So I can pass the reference to that, but I have to include that in the function or it won't work. And these are good things to just keep in mind, right? Because this is part of the reason you want to create modules, because it makes you think about, and probably even as I was writing it, I almost said we really should include, even though it's global. Just good practice because it tells somebody looking at the function, hey, there's something that it needs inside of it. Okay. All right, so now let's see. And always, once we get a clean, no errors, right? At least no errors on the console, then you test your app. Okay. Oh, it's horrible. Can't do it. Okay, so now we have another problem. Let's look at this one. On the render, oh, my data. Thought we fixed this one. Oh, you know what? This may be, no, it's there. Okay, let's go look at this one in more detail. I don't remember this one. By, okay, let's actually walk through the code here. When we're passing my data in, which we are, y, and actually it's on render 48. Okay, so it is on here. So let's actually just try reload again. Ah, aha. It's got a reference to the data. If I have my data here, okay, I have it here. My data length. Oh, wait a minute. Now it has it? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So it has it here. Let's let it go ahead and run. Oh, okay. So remember, there's two places we're calling, and now we have a different error, but we'll figure that one out in a minute. So what are the two places in our code we're calling render, right? We're calling render on the main, right, on the global scope, but we're also calling render inside of the event listener. So wherever we're calling render table, we have to include that. Because once we move those functions into there, then wherever those functions are utilized, we have to pass those references because now they're looking for it. They need it, right? Okay. So now we have a different problem. Oh, good. Now we have. So this is what happens. You do things one step at a time, solve them as they come up. So now we have key is not defined. Key is not defined. And it's here on the render. So we're a little further down. We can see it here. Key is not defined. Oh, when we define something, yeah, when I wrote this, let's just look. Okay. For in objects. Okay. Oh, yes, I forgot to put const there. And for some reason, and we could probably spend a little bit of time here, but I didn't, is we could figure out why. You know, I'm sure there's an explanation why. Not in the DB out in here, down here. Okay. Because, yeah, I'm sure there's a reason why, but at least that one was fairly straightforward once I saw the error. So let's see if that one actually fixed it. Okay. Let's go in, add another one. Remember, every time you need to test all of your functionality. This is where also a big thing in programming development is called test-driven development, where you actually write code that tests your code base because you want, machines can do things pretty well. But in this case, this looks like it handled the input for the form. So now let's see if the edit works. Oh, so now we have a problem with the edit. Because the form, remember, okay, because the form was referenced where? Okay, in the main, right? Again, these are just references to the DOM. So there are other things in this main file that are going to need reference to this form. Okay, mostly the event listener. So I could do this one of two ways. I could either duplicate it. I can't move it necessarily because I need do I need access to the form? Sorry, I'm sitting here. Oh yeah, I do. Just because I call it here. Is that the only place? That is the only place though. But that's okay. So let's see where the error is occurring inside of the render edit delete button or the edit delete buttons. So, either way, wonder what looks cleaner, right? So we could either take this reference, copy it, which seems like inefficient to me, right? We could do that, probably fix the error. Yeah, it does fix the error, it seems to. Let's see if it actually allows us. Oh, my data is not defined. Oh yeah, that creates a different one. We'll talk about that one too. But let's actually see if we can enter data. Because that was the problem we had before. Okay, so we can at least enter data with handling that. Okay, here. But I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily like having it in both places. To me, it feels like redundant. Okay, if I have it in both. So what I was doing a little reading about, you could actually create another module just for your references. You could also just pass them around, like I said before. Table made sense because right now we only needed it here, where it clears it on the render. We only needed that reference. So back over here, I think the way I would probably change this, because where are we passing it in, right? We're passing it, okay, remind me where the error occurs. There we go. I think it occurs right. Oh, this is just a stop. Now I got to remove. Oh, there it is. No, that's a different error. Ah, that's was the error. Was it on the edit? So it was on the render, the buttons. It didn't have it. So we could just pass it into the render table and then pass it on in. Actually, that's not clean either. Okay, here's what we could do. Is we could just under main.js in here pass the my data and we could pass the form reference. And then what we have to do though is under render, we also have to have, right? Under render, we have to have here the form. And then when we go to do the render delete buttons, we have to pass the form. God, this seems really ugly. There's a term that's used when you do something like this sometimes, and it's smelly code. It's like smelly cat, smelly code. So what I had to do is because I only am passing in. Oh, I didn't fix that one issue that we started with. So I should do that now to kind of make this a little more clear why I'm doing it. So because only in render table am I calling the render edit delete buttons. So this is the first call. So I have to place it here and then pass it through. Let's see if that fixes it. Okay. So does the edit? Wait a minute, is that undefined? Passed in the form. Oh, wait a minute, did I reverse them? No, I didn't. I didn't reverse them there. Should have been fine. Let's walk through it. Let's walk through it over here and see where I've called it. Here. When we hit the edit, render table. Oh, right, it's lost its context. That's right. This is asynchronous. It's lost its context. So passing it doesn't make sense. This is where I talked about before. That's why this felt smelly to me. Okay. Is that it's lost its reference because of the way the asynchronous nature of these event listeners are. So I'm going to back that out. I'm not going to do form. I'm undoing here, undoing, okay? And then I'm going to bring it back here. I am going to have it in both places. I think that's the way I originally did it too. I'm actually going to check because I run through this once before just playing with it and see if I actually did include it. Yeah, I did. I was thinking I could try something different, but I can't in this case because of, let's just see if that works. Okay. Let's let that run. Cool. No, we have a different problem to fix. No, we don't. Oh, yeah. My data. Oh, right. Because it also needs, the edit also needs my data. That's why. That's right. Now this one's different because this one's actual data being passed into it. Okay. Now we're passing my data into the render table. So in addition to the index, and we could, whatever way we do it, we have to be consistent. I typically would do it this way. I'd pass my data in here, comma, and then under the button, I would do my underscore data, comma. Okay. So the reason, let's see if this fixes it, and then I can explain why we can do it with the data reference versus the form reference. Okay, so let's see. Oh, good. So that did work because we're passing, in this case, a reference to the data, but evidently on the event listeners, you can't also grab that reference to the global form on main, the reference to main form. You have to have it in the global scope of that render JS. So let's just complete this to make sure. 22, yeah, that worked okay. Hit delete. Okay, so now we need to talk about this one. Okay. So as you can kind of see, doing this refactor, taking it one step at a time, is a good idea. And let's see, how far are we in? We're in a little bit longer. So let's actually, for the last thing we do though, is clean something up I meant to do earlier and I forgot. Notice how these two files, these two functions are a different color. I mentioned that because we do not need these two functions. We just get rid of them, okay? Because the only place they're needed is here inside of this module because it calls these functions. So what I do here is also get rid of this, okay? So I only have to export that which I need in the main, and I mentioned it and I forgot to go back and fix it, okay? So I know this can get a little confusing, but it's okay. Sometimes right before confusion comes clarity. So let's go ahead and pause this one, commit your code with step 1 refactor.